Hundreds were crushed, suffocated, and trapped as floors and roofs fell through to cellars.
Early reports say thousands of people are missing or trapped.
The second largest city in Armenia is in ruins. We saw houses turned into heaps of metal and concrete.
An earthquake of major proportions hits California from San Jose north to the Bay Area of San Francisco. But these calamities are dwarfed by comparison to what has happened in Iran. Perhaps as many as 70,000 dead in one of the most overwhelming natural disasters of this century. 500,000 homeless, 200,000 injured, in desperate need of care. Why then is the story fading so quickly from our attention?
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
If anything even approaching the dimension of the earthquake that struck Iran last Thursday were to occur here in the United States, it would occupy our every waking moment. The Iranian earthquake is unlike any natural disaster we've ever known in this country. It has killed more people in a few moments than all the soldiers we lost during the Vietnam War. And yet, in less than a week, we in the news media have already begun to cut back on our coverage. Charitable organizations report a relative trickle of donations compared to the response following other natural disasters in other parts of the world. Plainly put, there is still a lot of anger and hostility in this country toward Iran, and it appears to be a particularly durable kind of hostility. For all the years that the United States and the Soviet Union had been adversaries, for example, there was an outpouring of assistance from here following the earthquake in Soviet Armenia. Before we discuss what's going on in terms of helping Iran, we thought we should give you an overview of what's happening in that country from several different perspectives.
6
days after the earthquake, citizens are still sending their gifts and help to the disaster areas by land and air. The relief headquarters in Gilan announced that helicopters and aircraft of the Army and the Revolutionary Guards, as well as the border police, have transported 20 tons of supplies by air to the area through Gilan's center.
Red Cross officials said today the death toll could reach 70,000 because many large families were caught in their houses. The worst hit areas were Zanjan and Gilan. ITN's Robert Moore is among the first Western journalists to visit Gilan.
They've given up hope of finding survivors. Now just a long, painful task of clearing the rubble and of rebuilding the towns and villages. That task is coupled with efforts to prevent diseases from breaking out. Occasionally, paramedics interrupt to bring out the bodies, or in this case, bedding mistaken for a corpse. Mothers wait to see whose child they'll bring out next.
The fact that an earthquake happened here in this part of Iran is really no great surprise. This area could be called, for lack of a better term, Earthquake Alley. In the past 40 years, there have been 5 earthquakes here with a magnitude of 7 or more. 7, of course, being able to cause tremendous destruction. And in last week's earthquake, there was great destruction, widespread destruction over this entire region. Whole towns were flattened. Villages have simply disappeared. From the air, the sight is incredible. It looks as though some giant hand slapped down on a house of cards. Everything is flattened. Rows and rows and blocks of houses have become sticks. The fault line, the axis of the earthquake, is in the Alborz Mountains here in northern Iran. And in those mountains, there are still villages today which are cut off, inaccessible. And rescue workers expect to find many more dead once they are able to get past the rock slides and the blocked roads to reach those villages.
رئیس مؤسسه بین‌المللی زلزله شناسی و مهندسی زلزله وزارت فرهنگ و
The head of the Seismic Institute of Tehran, who has visited the disaster area, told our reporter that Gilan has been witness to many earthquakes in its history. Most of the houses demolished in the recent disaster in the city of Rasht had more than 4 floors because engineers have ignored security measures.
There's hardly anyone here who hasn't lost someone close, a friend or a relative. Whole families were wiped out. One man said he lost 11 members of his family. Another man said he lost 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and 12 nephews. Children were orphaned. Many children were orphaned in less than a minute. Most of these children will be taken care of by other family members because Islamic custom dictates that before the government steps in to put orphan children in foster care, it is up to the family to care for those children.
Tehran has been a very busy place these past several days. The focus here, one UN official told me, has been on the living, not the dead, especially trying to take care of the problems of the tens of thousands of people who were injured by the earthquake and those who were left homeless by it. We've spent a lot of time at Tehran's main airport. It's been the focal point for the international relief effort. At midday today, more than 70 planes have come there bringing relief supplies. At last count, I'm told that almost 90 countries have offered Iran assistance. That's not bad for a country that many people say has very few friends. Clearly, in this case, the people and their needs are taking precedence over politics.
Details about foreign aid sent to Iran, cash and commodities and help from foreign countries and Iranians abroad is still arriving in the country. Here is a partial list. From the United Nations, different commodities. From China, medical supplies. Austria, 30 tents and 2,000 blankets. Japan, a team of 22 doctors and nurses and 83 million yen's worth of medical supplies.
This effort has also seen the return of Americans to Iran. A private charity group called AmeriCare brought 40 tons of emergency supplies. A question, of course, is whether this humanitarian aid and goodwill will help bring down some of the barriers that exist between Iran and the rest of the world. There was an editorial today in the Tehran Times, which is a liberal or moderate newspaper, which suggests that some of those barriers may come down. I'll just read that portion which is appropriate. It says, the humanitarian reaction shown to the earthquake victims once again proves that there are things the international community can cooperate on beyond political considerations. Our Islamic ideology urges us to applaud such cooperation. That's a good sign. Now, one that is here and we see in the hotel that we're staying in, as we walk into the lobby, is a big sign that says, down with the USA. Now, that doesn't make us feel particularly welcomed, especially when we are Americans. Tehran has also been the focal point for Iran's domestic relief effort. It has been remarkable to watch. Every day, people line up to give blood for the victims of the earthquake. They bring in clothes and food. Everyone, it seems, is offering whatever they can. Tehran has also been the destination of the most critically injured in the tragedy. I was at a makeshift medical facility at the airport when they brought in some of the first victims. It was at times like this that it was the easiest to make the connection between the relief efforts in Tehran and the disaster to the north, and it was the most difficult to watch.
The Iranian rescue effort was described by the UN Relief Organization as rapid and impressive. And some international aid workers who have arrived here admit there's really not a whole lot more for them to do except assist the Iranians, because the people here took control of the situation quickly and handled the emergency in a very timely fashion, we're told.
The Iranian authority give very fantastic help here. All is a very good organization. We are quite surprised to see that, even in little village.
The Air Force and Army airlifted in supplies and medicines, airlifted out victims to Tehran, to hospitals for treatment. Iranian pilots have had a lot of practice in this sort of thing in the long years of the Iran-Iraq war. Iranian doctors and nurses and medical students worked around the clock to treat the injured and try to save the dying. Aid workers quickly set up tents to house the homeless. The living conditions are less than desirable, but at least people now have a place where they can sleep until the rebuilding is completed. A rebuilding that should take years, will probably take years. The destruction is so great that it will take a very, very long time to replace the water lines, to rebuild the homes, to rebuild the communities that have simply disappeared. And one Iranian official, underscoring the magnitude of what is facing this country, says that we must build the earthquake zone from scratch, meaning they have to start all over again here in northern Iran.
When we come back, we'll go live to ABC News correspondent Jim Hickey, who's standing by in Tehran. And we'll talk about public response in this country to the earthquake with the foreign editor of the Chicago Tribune, Jim Younger, and with Larry Jones, president of the private U.S. relief organization, Feed the Children.
This is ABC News.
President and founder of Feed the Children, an organization that's been involved in disaster relief around the world. How has reaction, Mr. Jones, compared this time around to what you've seen in the past with other foreign disasters?
Almost all the reaction, Ted, that we've had has been negative reaction, and what we've tried to do is see how we can best help the situation, irregardless of all the negative action that we're getting, and it's been very difficult.
Tell me about some of the negative reaction. What are you getting calls? Are you getting letters?
We're getting calls, and also we have people that work for us, and we've talked to in Washington as well as in California. I was in New York City over the weekend, and just about everyone that I talked to basically said, no, I don't think you should send any relief to Iran at all. And so consequently, when we got a call from the Committee for the Iran Earthquake Relief Fund, and they said, will you help us? I said, yes, we'll help you. And then we started walking through what you might say the minefield as to how we could help.
Why do you think it is that people are, I mean, as I pointed out before, we've had a long adversarial relationship with the Soviet Union, but when the earthquake erupted in Armenia a couple of years ago, public reaction was enormous.
I think one of the things, of course, is the hostage situation. Also, we do not have diplomatic relations with Iran. And the other thing is, I think people are saying, what will happen if we go and we help them? What will happen politically? Will this be good for us? Right now, I think we should be focusing on the children, the people there. They're hurting right now. I don't think we should look beyond the earthquake, because we at Feed the Children, we help regardless of a person's politics, their religion, or what their parents say, or what anybody else says. The people are hurting right now, and we need to be there helping them.
Jim Hickey, to what extent is this a political issue in Iran? And I think you know what I mean. In other words, there are probably some elements in Iran that don't want the government to accept foreign help.
Indeed, there are, Ted. There are some elements here in Iran who reject the efforts of the Americans to send relief supplies here. Hardliners in the Iranian newspapers suggested that this was American trickery, trying to gain the sympathy of the Iranians, and that this kind of relief efforts should be rejected. Now, that attitude is coming from the hardliners here in this country. I must say that there are many people here who welcome international relief, welcome aid from the United States and anywhere else. In fact, President Rafsanjani said that Iran would welcome aid from anywhere in the world except Israel and South Africa.
Jim Younger, I don't know if it's been your observation, but around the country, as we've been looking at the front pages of different newspapers, this story seems to have faded from the front page rather quickly. Can you imagine that if there had been 70,000 dead in a country like Germany or France or Italy, that the story would have gone to the inside quite as quickly?
I'm not sure. It's hard to say. Every day when we put out a newspaper, we've got a finite amount of space to deal with. There's an awful lot going on, too. There's President Bush on taxes, there's Nelson Mandela's visit, and a whole bunch of other things. It may be that if the quake had happened in a country with which Americans have a closer emotional connection, that it would have stayed out front a little bit longer. But I don't think that really there has been a terrible diminution of coverage, regardless of the placement of stories in the newspapers. For instance, in ours, we've run plenty of pictures, graphics, and a lot of words about what is happening there. And the curious thing is that sometimes when we put in the paper some of the things that are happening in Iran, for instance, a newspaper that says, you know, even under the rubble, our people are saying death to America, that tends to have a negative effect, and I think we might get blamed a little bit for carrying a not very nice message.
I mean, I take every point that you've made here, but I've got to argue with you on one point. If 70,000 people were killed, I mean, here we are, we're only 5 days after the event, and indeed those numbers have been rising every day, and according to what Jim Hickey was saying before, they may yet rise a little bit more. I can't imagine that story being off the front page, if it were any other country.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say. It's a judgment call that's made every day. My point would be that what is happening is being pretty adequately covered, I think, by my newspaper and by the newspapers I tend to see every day. And it's a little difficult to make comparisons. For instance, in the Soviet-Armenian earthquake, remember that it was Mr. Gorbachev himself who flagged that by flying back suddenly, alerting everybody to the fact that this was a major disaster, and that got kicked off that way. And I wouldn't argue either that there is a certain politicized element to all this. You can see that in the debate that's taking place in Iran today, and there's no doubt also that a lot of Americans still do remain, because of the hostages and other reasons, pretty angry with Iran. So the whole notion of providing aid to a country that is seen as an enemy of the United States exists out there.
All right. I'd like to go back live to Iran in just a moment so that we can get an update on the very latest of what's happening there. We will continue our conversation and go back to Jim Hickey in Tehran in just a moment.
He hanged a British journalist, used chemical weapons on his own citizens. He may be the most dangerous man in the world. Diane Sawyer with Iraq's president, prime time Thursday.
Hollywood's record breakers. Tomorrow, the top box office blockbusters of all time.
Also, Peter Scolari and Jeannie Francis here on Good Morning America tomorrow.
And we're back once again with ABC correspondent Jim Hickey live from Tehran. Jim, I remember after the earthquake in San Francisco, despite all the most modern of communications gear and the much easier sort of counting that can take place in a community the size of San Francisco, we were still way off in the preliminary estimates of how many people were killed. Where did they come up with these numbers of 50,000, and how accurate do you think they are?
The numbers are coming from the villages and towns and provinces, Ted, that are reporting the numbers of dead. But I have to tell you, and I think you're hinting at the right thing, we really don't know how many people have died, and we don't know how accurate those numbers are. Is it 50,000? Is it 70,000? Is it a lot less? Will it be a lot more? No one really knows, and one of the reasons, there are several reasons. One is no one is keeping an accurate count. No one is keeping an accurate list of names of people who have died, who were killed. And secondly, bodies are being buried just about as quickly as they are being discovered. One is for health reasons. It's very, very hot here in Tehran. It's above 100 degrees every day, and the bodies are being quickly buried in mass graves, which is a very difficult thing here in Islam, but they are doing it for health reasons. So for all of that, no one really knows how many people have been killed. What do they most need over there, Jim? The Iranians say they most need money and medical supplies. The Iranian government over the weekend made it clear that they can handle relief workers. They have enough relief workers. We have seen here in Tehran and other cities people lined up for blocks and blocks every day donating blood and food and clothing. So they have plenty of those. It's what the Iranians have been saying all along. They are welcoming the aid, but they are saying, don't send us workers. We have workers. We don't really need any more. What we need is money and medical supplies. Mr. Jones, give me a sense of what the greatest objection seems to be among those who are calling, and then just to put things in perspective, also give me a sense of what kinds of donations you are getting.
I think you need to know, Ted, that we call the drug companies that helped us during the Armenian earthquake and the California earthquake, and most of them said, we're not doing anything this time. We called airlines, and they said, we're not doing anything this time. And you'll find it interesting that it was the Armenians who are giving us a plane, and we're going to be putting 40 tons, basically, of medical supplies and other supplies on that airplane to go to Tehran this weekend. So I feel like that because Armenia's been through an earthquake and they know what you go through, that they were willing to donate an airplane for us to fill it full of supplies to take to Tehran. And I hope that this program tonight really encourages people to get involved, because the need is phenomenal when you've got 500,000 people who are homeless. Even after 2 weeks, a month, there's going to be a lot of need in Iran.
Now, Jim Younger, just to ask you a question on a different kind of basis, because you have spent a lot of time in Tehran, how long do you think it's going to be before they're going to be able to rebuild some of these communities?
I think it's going to take a terribly long time, because an awful lot of those communities which I have visited include buildings that were not very well built. The government is not terribly efficient, so the need for aid is going to continue for a very long time, particularly in the beginning to feed that 500,000 homeless, or an estimated 500,000, and only after that will begin the much more difficult and time-consuming and expensive proposition of building new and decent housing for them. It's a mammoth job, no question about it.
All right, gentlemen, I thank you all very much. Jim Hickey, Jim Younger, Larry Jones, good of all of you to join us. I'll be back in a moment. Tonight with Peter Jennings, how scientists are harnessing sunlight to help deal with one of our dirtiest problems, using solar energy to clean up toxic waste. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $19.95 plus $3.95 shipping and handling. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $3 to Nightline Transcripts, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.